The house on Ridgecrest Drive had been cleaned every Thursday for 11 months, and not once had Gordon Haas said more for Gord 12's word to the man who cleaned it. That was not unusual. Theodore Marsh had learned over 22 years of running his own small cleaning service in Oakville, Ontario, that wealthy clients preferred it that way. They wanted their homes spotless and their privacy intact. They wanted someone who moved through their space like water, present, necessary, and gone before they had to think about it. Theodore was good at being gone. He was 58 years old, drove a 2009 Dodge Caravan with a crack in the rear bumper, and wore the same kind of gray cotton work shirt every day, the kind with a chest pocket that had lost its button sometime around 2019. His hair had gone fully silver before he turned 50. He kept it short and combed. He did not wear a watch. He did not own a cell phone with a data plan. He called his daughter every Sunday from the landline he still kept in his apartment above the laundromat on Kerr Street, and she teased him about it every single time without fail. "Dad, you're the only person I know who still has a landline." "It works," he always said. "Things that work don't need replacing." She would laugh, and he would feel the particular warmth that only came from that sound, and then they would talk for an hour about nothing important and everything that mattered. Theodore had been a widower for 9 years. He had learned to carry that the way you carry a stone in your shoe. You never forget it's there, but you find a way to walk anyway. The Haas house was one of 14 clients on his Thursday route, but it was the last stop, which meant he was always there in the late afternoon when the light came through the west-facing windows and turned everything amber. The house itself was not ostentatious by the standards of the neighborhood. 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, professional landscaping. Solid, considered, the kind of home that suggested its owner had chosen quality over spectacle. Gordon Haas was 63, recently retired from something in finance. Theodore had gathered this from the few fragments of conversation that had passed between them over the months. There were framed photographs on the wall near the study. Gordon at what appeared to be a company function, younger, standing slightly apart from the group in that way that some people did when they were the one everyone else was watching. There were no photographs of a spouse. There was a guest room that had the careful, untouched quality of a room no one had slept in recently. There was a medicine cabinet in the main bathroom that Theodore never opened, because it was not his business to open it, but which rattled softly when he cleaned the mirror above the sink. Gordon was usually home when Theodore came. He worked from his study on the 2nd floor, or sat in the sunroom with a book, or stood in the kitchen making tea with the focused deliberateness of someone who had recently decided that small rituals were worth the effort. He was polite, quiet. He thanked Theodore at the end of each visit with a nod and sometimes a brief remark about the weather or the drive. 12 words. 14 on a talkative day. Theodore did not need more than that. He was not there to be known. He was there to do the work. But in his 11th month of Thursdays at the Ridgecrest house, Theodore began to notice things, not dramatic things, not the kind of things that would have announced themselves. Small things, the kind that accumulate the way snowfall accumulates, each individual flake weightless, but eventually they change the shape of everything. The first thing was the kitchen. Gordon drank tea, always tea, and Theodore knew this because he washed the same sturdy ceramic mug every week, the one with the small chip on the handle, but in October a second mug had started appearing. Not a matching one, a different one, taller, blue, the kind sold at hospital gift shops. And it appeared not in the dish rack, where Gordon left things to dry, but in the back of the cupboard above the refrigerator, pushed behind a seldom-used pasta pot, as if it had been hidden there after use, rather than simply stored. Theodore washed it the first time without thinking. The second time, he noticed it smelled faintly of something medicinal before the hot water hit it. The third time, he set it gently on the counter and thought about it for a moment before washing it, the way he sometimes paused over things that didn't quite fit. The second thing was the study. Gordon's desk faced the window, and Theodore cleaned around it carefully, moving nothing unnecessarily. But by November, there was a new addition to the desk. A small notebook, always closed, always placed at the same 45-degree angle to the corner of the blotter. Theodore had no reason to touch it. He didn't, but he could see, on the outside cover, a date written in ballpoint pen, not a year, just a month and a day, repeated in the way someone repeats something they are trying not to forget. or perhaps trying to count toward. The third thing was Gordon himself. Theodore was not a man who studied people. He was observant in the way that people who work with their hands become observant, attuned to the physical world, to what was in its right place and what was not. And Gordon Haas, across those autumn months, began to look like something that was slightly out of its right place. Not dramatically. Not in any way that would have drawn attention from someone who didn't know the baseline. But Theodore knew the baseline. He had spent nearly a year reading the quiet language of that house, and the language was beginning to shift. Gordon's posture had changed. Where he had once sat very straight in the sunroom, the posture of a man accustomed to boardrooms and the kind of attention that required a certain physical authority. He now sat with a slight forward lean, as if holding himself in place required more effort than it once had. His color, which in summer had been the kind of healthy outdoor tan that spoke of golf courses and weekend cottage drives, had dulled. His hands, Theodore noticed when they passed each other in the hallway, had a faint tremor that he controlled with practiced steadiness, the way Theodore's own father had once controlled his, long ago, when he'd refused to admit to anyone that something was wrong. Theodore knew that look. He had sat across from it at a kitchen table for the last year of his father's life, watching the man pour coffee with both hands wrapped around the mug, pretending he simply liked holding it that way. He did not say anything. It was not his place to say anything. He moved through the rooms of the Ridgecrest house with the same quiet efficiency he always brought to his work, and he did not allow himself to linger too long on what he noticed. But he noticed. December came early that year, in the way that December sometimes does in southern Ontario. Not gradually, but all at once, a hard frost arriving overnight and refusing to leave. Theodore scraped his van windshield every morning in the gray pre-dawn and drove his route thinking about small things. His daughter's upcoming visit, whether the Ryersons on his Tuesday route needed a second hour, whether he should replace the mop head before the holidays or wait until January. He did not think about Gordon Haas. He tried at least not to, but on the second Thursday of December, something changed. Theodore arrived at the Ridgecrest house at 4:15 as usual. He used his key. Gordon had given him one after the third visit, with a brevity that suggested he found the giving of house keys to service workers to be a straightforward matter of logistics rather than trust, though Theodore suspected it was both. He let himself in, removed his boots on the mat, and began his work in the front hall. He was halfway through the living room when he became aware of a sound from the kitchen. Not a crash, not a call for help, just a sound that was wrong in the way small things were wrong, a quiet, controlled kind of wrong, the sound of someone trying not to make a sound. Theodore set down his supplies and went to the kitchen doorway. Gordon Haas was standing at the counter, one hand braced against the edge of it, head slightly bowed. The tall blue mug sat beside him, steam rising. He was breathing in the careful, measured way of someone who had recently decided that breathing was something that required management. He looked up when he heard Theodore. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Gordon straightened, not quickly, not with embarrassment exactly, but with the ingrained reflex of a man who had spent decades presenting a composed surface to the world and did not know how to stop. "Mr. Marsh," he said. "Mr. Haas," Theodore said. There was a pause that lasted perhaps 4 seconds. Theodore had spent enough of his life in silence not to be afraid of 4 seconds. "I didn't hear you come in," Gordon said. "I knocked," Theodore said. "The door was unlocked." Gordon nodded. He reached for the blue mug and drank from it slowly. His hand was steadier now, but Theodore had already seen what he'd seen, and seeing was not something you could unsee. "Would you like me to come back another time?" Theodore asked. It was a genuine question. He asked it without inflection the way he tried to ask most things. Gordon looked at him. Something shifted behind his eyes, a small movement like light changing on water. "No," he said. "Go ahead. Do what you need to do." Theodore nodded and went back to the living room. He finished the downstairs in his usual time. He moved through the rooms with the same careful attention he always brought, vacuumed the rugs in parallel lines, wiped down the baseboards, cleaned the inside of the microwave, which Gordon seemed incapable of remembering to do despite Theodore's consistent wordless reminder of doing it every week without fail. He did not hurry. He did not slow down. He worked. But when he came back through the kitchen to collect his supplies before heading upstairs, Gordon was still there. He had moved to the small table by the window that overlooked the backyard. He was sitting with his hands wrapped around the blue mug, staring at the bare maple in the corner of the yard. The tree had lost all its leaves by mid-November, and the branches against the gray December sky had the particular quality of something waiting. Theodore collected his caddy from the counter. "That mug," he said, and then stopped. Gordon turned. Theodore had not planned to say anything. He was not sure why he had started. But he had started, and he was not a man who left things unfinished. "I've washed it a few times now," Theodore said. "The blue one. It smells different, before the hot water." He said it plainly, without drama, the way you said a true thing when the moment called for it, and you had decided not to be a coward about it. Gordon was quiet for a long moment. He looked back at the yard, at the bare maple. "I suppose it would," he said finally. Theodore waited. He had learned from years of working alone in other people's homes that silence after a truth had a particular texture. It was not empty. It was full of the person's next decision. "I was diagnosed in September," Gordon said. He did not look away from the window. "Early Parkinson's. Very early, they tell me, which is meant to be reassuring." He paused. "I haven't quite decided yet whether it is." Theodore stood with his supply caddy and did not move. He understood instinctively that moving would break something. "I haven't told anyone," Gordon continued. "My son is in Calgary. My daughter is in Edinburgh. I have a brother in Hamilton who I speak to at Christmas." He lifted the mug and set it down again without drinking. "I thought I would figure out how to tell them. I've been thinking about how to tell them since September." "It's December now," Theodore said. It was not an accusation. It was just the fact of it. Gordon looked at him then, and something in his expression was the look of a man who had not been spoken to plainly in a very long time. "Yes," he said, "it is." Theodore set his caddy on the counter. He pulled out the chair across from Gordon and sat down. He was not sure he had ever sat at a client's kitchen table in 22 years of doing this work. He was also not sure he had ever needed to. "My father had a tremor," Theodore said. "Started when he was 67. He poured coffee with both hands and told everyone he just ran cold. He folded his hands on the table. He waited 14 months to tell us. By then it was further along than it needed to be." Gordon absorbed this. He did not look away. "I'm not saying that to scare you," Theodore said. "I'm saying it because you're clearly not cold." A very quiet sound escaped Gordon then. It might have been a laugh. It had the shape of one at least, though it was worn thin. "No," he said. "I'm not." They sat for a while in the December kitchen. The light had gone from amber to gray. Outside, a cardinal landed briefly in the bare maple and then was gone. Theodore did not say, "You should see a specialist." He did not say, "Tell your children." He did not give Gordon Haas the list of things that needed doing, because Gordon Haas was a man who had spent 4 decades making lists of things that needed doing, and what had not helped him was another list. What he said, eventually, was this: "Do you have someone who comes with you to the appointments?" Gordon looked at his hands. "No." "Would you want someone to?" A long pause. The kind that meant the person was deciding not whether to answer, but whether to let themselves want what the question was offering. "I don't know," Gordon said carefully. "I haven't let myself think about that." "All right," Theodore said. "Think about it." He stood, picked up his caddy, and went upstairs to finish the work. He cleaned the bathrooms, the master bedroom, the guest room that no one slept in. He changed the sheets with the same quiet efficiency as always. He ran the vacuum in parallel lines. He did not think about the conversation downstairs. He had said what he had to say, and he had meant it without agenda, and that was the only way he knew how to mean things. When he came downstairs, Gordon was still at the table. He had made a second cup of tea, the regular kind, in the chipped ceramic mug. He had made one for Theodore as well, which was sitting at the other place at the table, steam still rising. Theodore looked at it. He set his caddy down. He sat down. He drank the tea. They talked for 40 minutes, about Gordon's son in Calgary, who worked in oil and gas and called every other Sunday, about Gordon's daughter in Edinburgh, who was doing a postdoctoral fellowship in marine biology, and sent photographs of gray Scottish coastlines that Gordon kept in a folder on his laptop and looked at more often than he admitted. About the house on Ridgecrest Drive, which Gordon had bought with his wife 26 years ago and had never quite figured out what to do with after she died. About Theodore's daughter, who lived in Waterloo and was finishing her master's in social work and called every Sunday from her cell phone, which she held slightly too close to her face, so that Theodore could see her forehead in the video call, but not quite her eyes. About what it was like to be in a house alone, about the particular quality of that. Neither of them used the word lonely because neither of them needed to. The word was understood between them, the way things are understood between people who have been living with something long enough to have stopped naming it. Gordon told him, quietly and without performance, what the neurologist had said in September. The specifics, the trajectory, the uncertainty that lived inside the words very early, like a room inside a room that you could not quite see into. He had not said these things aloud to another person since leaving the neurologist's office, and as he said them now, his voice had the careful quality of someone testing whether the words would hold up, whether saying them in the air would make them more real or less. Theodore listened the way he cleaned houses, completely, without distraction, without waiting for his turn. When Gordon was finished, Theodore said, "The tremor isn't the thing that's been worrying you most." Gordon was quiet. "You're worried about what it means for later," Theodore said. "Not now, later, when it's something your son or your daughter would have to manage for you." Gordon looked out the window. "I spent my whole career," he said slowly, "making sure other people didn't have to carry things that were mine to carry." "Yes," Theodore said. "My father said something like that too." "What did you say to him?" Theodore turned the mug in his hands. "I told him that letting someone help you wasn't putting your weight on them. It was letting them stand next to you while you carried it." The kitchen was very quiet. "He didn't entirely believe me," Theodore added, but he stopped pouring his coffee with both hands after that. He just used one hand. He let us see the tremor. He paused. "I think that was his version of believing me." Gordon nodded slowly. He was looking at the maple tree again, the cardinal long since gone, but there was something different in how he was looking at it. Not as if it were simply winter, a thing to wait through, but as if it were a tree that had been through many winters and had every intention of putting out leaves again in April. "I'll call Marcus," he said, almost to himself, his son, and then Eleanor, his daughter in Edinburgh, though he'd referred to her only as my daughter in Scotland until just then. The name came out quietly, like something he'd been keeping warm. Theodore nodded once. He gathered his things. He put on his boots at the front door, laced them carefully. Gordon walked him to the door, which he had never done before in 11 months of Thursdays. At the threshold, Gordon said, "Next week then, next Thursday," Theodore said. He drove home through the early dark of the December evening, the van heater running loud, the crack in the rear bumper collecting the first dusting of this winter's snow. He thought about his daughter, and about Sunday's call, and about the way the cardinal had appeared in the maple and then disappeared so quickly you might have missed it if you weren't paying attention. He had been paying attention. That was the thing about his work. The whole point of it, really, had always been to pay attention. He stopped at the Tim Hortons on Spears Road because he had been driving past it for a decade and had never once stopped, and tonight he thought he might. He ordered a medium coffee, the plain kind, no sugar. He sat for a few minutes at a table by the window and watched the traffic move through the intersection and the snow beginning to gather on the curb. He thought about Gordon Haas sitting at his kitchen table with both hands around a blue mug, staring at a bare tree, holding a truth he had not known how to set down. He thought about how long a person could hold something before they forgot they were allowed to put it somewhere. He finished his coffee. He drove home. He let himself into the apartment above the laundromat, hung his coat on the hook behind the door, and called his daughter from the landline even though it was a Thursday and not a Sunday. She picked up on the second ring. "Dad?" She sounded immediately alert, the way she always did when he called off schedule. That particular quality of attention that he had come to understand was just how she loved him. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," he said. "I just wanted to hear your voice." She was quiet for a moment, then, "I'm glad you called." He sat down on the end of his bed and talked with her for an hour, the old rotary dial of the landline cool and solid in his hand, the apartment quiet around him. Outside, the snow was coming down steadily now, covering the parking lot, softening the edges of everything. In a house on Ridgecrest Drive across town, a man who had spent 3 months carrying a truth alone was sitting at his kitchen table with his phone in his hand, staring at a number in Calgary that he had been staring at for 3 months without pressing call. This time he pressed it. It rang once, twice, and then a voice, surprised and warm and immediately present. Dad, I wasn't expecting you tonight. I know, Gordon Haas said. I have something to tell you, and I should have told you sooner. Outside the window, snow was settling on the branches of the old maple. By April, there would be leaves again. There almost always were.